Mike Hall had a huge car auction in 2021 that looked like it was the end of everything. He had been collecting cars for 40 years, and all of it disappeared in just one day. The TV show Rust Valley Restorers showed its last episode with this heartbreaking sale. Fans thought they were saying goodbye forever to the legendary Junkyard King. But then, something weird happened. New episodes started showing up. Mike was still on TV, still fixing cars, and still living out his dream. How did a guy who lost his entire empire somehow manage to keep his show going? The answer shows a secret that most people watching never knew about what really happened. Mike Hall was born on February 4, 1958 in St. Boniface, which is part of Winnipeg, Manitoba. When he was just a little kid, his dad got a job with the Canadian Pacific Railway. So the whole family packed up and moved west to Kamloops, British Columbia. That move completely changed everything for Mike. Living in the interior of British Columbia gave him tons of room to explore and lots of space to check out back roads and open fields. It didn't take very long before one thing totally took over his world: cars. Not the shiny new ones, but old beaten-up wrecks just sitting forgotten in fields and behind old barns. By the early 1970s, when he was only a teenager, Mike had already started sneaking into people's backyards and checking out old country roads, searching for dead cars that he could bring back to life, while most kids his age were saving up money for records or bikes. Mike was dragging home junky old cars that nobody else even wanted. He didn't look at the rust and see garbage. He saw a possibility. A beat-up car from the 1950s. Or a rotting old pickup truck wasn't trash in his eyes. It was like a puzzle just waiting to be put together. Some of his friends thought he was kind of weird. His neighbors would give him strange looks, but he didn't even care. He was already collecting car after car, putting them wherever he had space. At a time when other teenagers were trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, Mike already knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted to fix things with wheels. By the time Mike was in his 20s during the late 1970s, he had collected dozens of old vintage cars. He hadn't gone to any special trade school. There weren't any fancy certificates hanging on his wall. What he did have was real hands-on experience. He had taught himself absolutely everything: how to rebuild engines, how to work with metal and shape it, how to bring a car back from being completely dead. Every wreck he brought home became a new lesson for him. Every engine that refused to start turned into a challenge he had to solve. And slowly, all that trying and failing and trying again turned into real skill. The kind of skill you can't learn sitting in a classroom. It came from scraped up knuckles and spending long nights working in freezing cold sheds. Mike Hall didn't grow up thinking he would end up owning hundreds of old cars. But his obsession with rust and engines didn't just come from nowhere. In the 1980s, way before any TV cameras ever showed up, he was already climbing up cliffs and literally blowing apart the sides of mountains to earn a living. That's where his actual career got started. He opened a company called Chimera Springs Rockworks. And this wasn't just your regular construction job. Mike wasn't pouring concrete or laying down bricks. He was drilling holes into cliff faces, hanging off ropes, and setting off controlled explosions. This was super dangerous, exhausting work that most people would never even think about doing. But Mike absolutely loved the adrenaline rush. It was during those years that people started calling him the Rasta Blasta because of his long dreadlocked hair and his explosive job. The nickname really stuck and followed him around for the rest of his life. Through the 1980s and 1990s, and even into the 2000s, he kept working in that business. He became well known all across British Columbia for his blasting work, and he made pretty good money from it. But he wasn't putting that money in the bank. He was spending almost every penny on junk cars, and not just one or two here and there, either. He had this hunger for forgotten old vehicles. It didn't even matter if they were completely covered in rust or missing half their parts. If Mike thought a car had a soul or an interesting story behind it, he wanted to own it, and if it needed saving, that just made him want it even more. He wasn't out there buying shiny restored classic cars. He was hunting for rust buckets that everyone else had completely abandoned. Over the next few decades, his property started getting totally filled up with vehicles from everywhere. Some of them were rare muscle cars from the 1960s. Others were beat-up old pickup trucks or European sports cars that hadn't even run in years. Every single time he got paid for blasting rocks on a job, he would turn around and use that money to bring another broken-down machine home. By the time the 2010s came around, people started wondering just how many cars he actually owned. The number was totally unbelievable. Over 400 vehicles were just sitting on his land. And it wasn't even really a collection anymore. It was like a whole landscape made of rust and metal that went on as far as you could see. He used to joke around that he didn't actually collect cars, he collected rust. That's where the name Rust Brothers came from in the first place. The guys who worked alongside him weren't just regular mechanics or workers. They were part of this same weird mission he was on. Mike wasn't trying to flip cars to make a quick profit or build some fancy showroom. He was trying to rescue machines that other people had completely forgotten about. Even if the cars never actually got restored, just saving them from getting crushed at the scrapyard felt like a victory to him. And while people on the outside didn't always get it, there was something about the way Mike talked about those cars that made it super clear this wasn't just some hobby. It was something way deeper than that. He said once that he couldn't just walk away from a car that needed saving. He felt like they were calling out to him. And every single explosion he set off during the day was just one more step toward being able to afford another piece of rolling history at night. Mike Hall never really tried to become someone famous. Long before he ever showed up on TV, he was already living a totally different kind of life out in the Shuswap area of British Columbia. He had quietly settled down on a farm out there, somewhere peaceful and far away from all the noise and chaos. He got married, though he never told the public his wife's name. They raised a family together, including their son Connor Charman Hall, who was born sometime in the 1980s. Mike also had a little dog named Minnie, who quickly became part of the family, too. But even though the farm was quiet and peaceful, Mike himself was anything but calm. His obsession with cars didn't just stop because he had a wife and kid at home. In fact, it actually caused some problems. His wife had to set down a rule: no more junk cars allowed on their property. Their farm was 26 acres, and she definitely didn't want it turning into another rust-filled graveyard. But Mike didn't put up a fight about it. He just found another place where he could chase his dream. He bought a separate bivouac piece of land in the nearby town of Tappan, not too far from Shuswap Lake. It was right off the Trans-Canada Highway, and it became something that would later be legendary. That place turned into what people started calling Mike's Field of Dreams. It was just a sunburnt piece of land, completely filled with hundreds of rusting old cars, stretching out as far as anyone could see. Some cars were from the 1940s, some from the 1970s, others were totally stripped down or buried under grass. But to Mike, every single one of them still had some life left in it. He didn't look at the rust and see junk, he saw potential and possibility. Through the 2000s, Mike's life moved back and forth between two totally different extremes. During the day, he worked his main job blasting rocks as part of a highway construction crew. But at night, he completely transformed into someone else. He would go to his junkyard and work all alone, like some kind of mad scientist, trying to breathe life back into forgotten pieces of metal. He didn't care at all if nobody was there watching. He wasn't doing any of this for fame or attention. He did it simply because he absolutely loved it. But fate had some other plans in store. In 2016, something totally unexpected happened. Mike was working up in the mountains of British Columbia when a major rockslide blocked off a highway. The cleanup crew needed help, and they needed it fast. So they called in Mike Hall, and when he showed up with all his gear and experience, something pretty wild happened. The Discovery Channel crew was out there filming a documentary called Highway Through Hell, and they decided to include Mike in one of their episodes. That's when the world got its very first real look at who he was, wearing a hard hat and scaling cliffs like it was absolutely nothing. Mike walked up to this massive pile of boulders and set his charges. He used his famous Rasta-Blasta dynamite system to break the rocks apart and get the road cleared. It was just a small cameo appearance, only a few minutes of screen time, but it was enough to make an impact. His fearless attitude, his crazy wild hair, and his intense energy made people stop what they were doing and pay attention. By the time Mike Hall reached his late 50s, his quiet little corner of Tappan, British Columbia, had turned into something that most people couldn't even believe unless they saw it with their own two eyes. Spread out across acres and acres of land were more than 500 rusted,